Yeah. Okay, there we go.
My name is Tyler, and today I'll be refuting. Well, a couple of weeks ago, our classmate Kiki made the claim that the use of chemical pesticides on crops is harmful to our society. But today, I'd like to state that I believe that the information that she gave in support of this main claim wasn't substantial and/or trustworthy enough to prove that this claim is true today. And to support her main claim, she used 3 supporting claims. 1, that chemical pesticides are harmful to the human body. 2, chemical pesticides are harmful to the environment. And 3, chemical pesticides are harmful to the tender ecosystem. For this first supporting claim, she used an article published by the company Livestrong. For this first claim saying that chemical pesticides are harmful to the human body. And from this article, she pointed out the fact that pesticides affect the nervous system, but I found after looking at the article that this evidence used only stated that organophosphates have an effect on the nervous system, but don't really give any reference or to any research or statistics that may have been done to prove this, and nor does it state how it really affects the nervous system itself. From this article, she also stated that it said that pesticides increase the chance of ADHD in children. And when I looked at the article, it stated that they gained this evidence through a 2010 article posted by CNN. And first of all, the fact that it's from 2010 makes it already like 7 years outdated. And it also gives no proof that any tests or studies were actually taken to confirm this. All it does is states that they have this information in this article from another article that may have gotten it from another article, so we don't really know whether this information is trustworthy or not. Also, I believe that generally a lot of fruits and vegetables are washed before eating, and so it's not really taken into account whether these people that have been eating these fruits or vegetables have been washing their foods before eating them, and thus have been washing the pesticides that may exist on them off or not. And for her second supporting claim, where she says chemical pesticides are harmful to the environment, she uses a report posted from Cornell University, which seems to try to conclude that the pesticides have been polluting the soil around the area. And though this evidence is coming from a pretty reliable source, being Cornell University, which I think is generally pretty reliable, when I looked up this report online, I found that the information is already about 5 years old. So it makes it a little harder to trust, saying that the statistics that they may have found in this article 5 years ago may be different to the statistics found now, because we may be using different pesticides, or maybe have stricter regulations on the pesticides. And for her third supporting claim, she states that chemical pesticides are harmful to the tender ecosystem. And for this one, she uses the same Livestrong article from online. And I believe though it states that the studies show pesticides may have an effect on animals, it also states in the article that studies on humans have been inconclusive, so we don't really know if it's just the animals that it's affecting, or if humans are really affected by this as well. Also, the article, again, doesn't really give any information upon the studies that were made to conclude this, including who conducted the studies or what pesticides were included in this study, or the date which the pesticide, or the date these studies were conducted, making it a little harder to believe. She also states that, or kind of in contradiction to the tender ecosystems idea, I feel that, farmland isn't really necessarily a tender ecosystem because the whole area is manipulated by man. And so, therefore, because we're growing crops on this area, crops usually bring in more insects, and so then the effect of the pesticides on the area doesn't necessarily mean it's having a large effect on the ecosystem, because we're already having an effect on the ecosystem by growing crops there. In addition to all this, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA clarifies that any pesticides that are used on food must meet their restrictions in these in order to be produced and sold to the community. And I'm hoping that if these restrictions are met, pesticides shouldn't necessarily be a danger to our community. And in conclusion, though Kiki makes an interesting point, I don't believe her evidence is substantial enough to prove her main claim.
All right, Tyler, your strategy consists of basically picking at the evidence that the advocate's using without providing any counter arguments on some of your claims. And I think you've got a couple of places where there are some reasonable presses to make about the way the evidence is being used, but they would carry much more weight if you had some evidence of your own to go along with it. For example, on that last point, you mentioned the EPA requiring restrictions. I'm going, oh, good, we're going to finally get this argument about how these things are relatively safe. And then your argument comes down to, so what I'm hoping is that the EPA is making them safe. And I'm going, well, then what are the restrictions if that's not what they're designed to do? What data does the EPA have that their rules are effective or preventing those things? Anything like that would have been helpful in this particular situation. I think there's a lot of stuff that suggests that pesticides are highly controlled, that exposure is limited as best as possible, that in making it available to the general public, they do the best to minimize the crossover or the contamination of pesticides. But I don't get any of that kind of argument. I don't have any evidence that supports that. That's just my belief. That's a pre-existing presumption on my part. And you don't even take advantage of that. It seems like the closest you come to it is the idea that people should be washing their fruits and vegetables. And I think that that's a reasonable point to make. But I don't even know if that's the kind of contamination to the human body that we're at risk for. Maybe it's the exposure to people who are using these products, and like farm workers and farmers and people who do the processing. Maybe they're the ones that we are supposed to be worrying about. We don't really know. This is like the second or third time somebody's made this argument. I'm sorry, 2010 is not that old. And unless you can show me that something had changed substantially since 2010, I think there's a little bit of a problem suggesting that's out of date. I mean, earlier I had heard an argument, it wasn't yours, 2014, that's old. I'm going, I'm sorry, that's barely 2 years old. Is there some reason to believe conditions have changed within that amount of time that wouldn't make this true? Look, if pesticides are bad, if they were bad in 2010, what's happened since 2010 that wouldn't make them bad anymore, wouldn't make them dangerous? If you've got some evidence that suggests that we've got new pesticides or stronger regulations, that's what we need to have, and that's what was missing here. I think you've got the right idea there because you suggested that, but there's not any proof on that, and I think that's the problem. On the environmental stuff, you're saying, well, maybe there are different tests, maybe they are. We're back to the same thing. You're kind of shifting the burden of proof. You're saying they made this argument. Well, they need to update their argument, but you don't give us a reason why the argument needs to be updated. And I think that's missing. The one challenge that you gave to the Livestrong study on the third point is that we don't know the source, we don't know which pesticides, we don't know the date of the research. Those are all legitimate presses to make. Those are things that raise questions, but they don't necessarily make an argument that says that we can't trust this, especially if you would imagine that most people are probably predisposed to believe pesticides are generally bad. We want to use them as little as possible, which apparently is what the rules are all about. So I think you need to have a little bit more on these particular points other than just picking at the evidence a little bit. The absence of any evidence from your own perspective, I think, really hurts the position that you're taking there. All right, thank you.